Welcome back to Company Grip Guitar. I am Ben, and today I want to talk about this, the Gamechanger Audio Motor Pedal. Let's get into it. So I'm pretty excited about this one. This is the Gamechanger Audio Motor Pedal. To be honest with you, I forgot this was even coming out. I forgot I ordered it. Then I got an email from Gamechanger that said, your shipment has been shipped, should go through US Customs and be at your doorstep sometime at the end of July. And yeah, this arrived yesterday. I played with it for 4 or 5 hours before I decided, you know what, I need to do my video review so it still looks presentable and doesn't have scuff marks all over it. So let's talk about the basic features of this pedal right now before we get into the sounds of it. I pre-ordered this pedal sometime in mid-April, just got here in end of July, so what is that, about 3.5, 4 months, something like that. I paid $299 for it, but what I understand is the retail price now, or the non-pre-order price, will be $380. This is the Redline Red finish, but there is also a Blue Viper finish and a Jet Black finish. I was a little confused if the Redline Red and the Blue Viper were only pre-order colors, or if that will just be available, you know, in the standard lineup. I tend to believe that the black will be the standard and this is the special pre-order color. We'll find out very soon, I'm sure. So the pedal arrives in this nice checkerboard box here. You've got, of course, the user manual here, which tells you pretty much everything you need to know about the pedal. You've also got a MIDI implementation guide, as well as some other specs on the pedal itself. There's a bunch of stickers in here. I've got a feedback card / lifetime warranty card. And then lastly, you get some rubber feet for the pedal. So first off, the power. This is a power-hungry pedal. You're gonna need at least a 500 mAh power supply at 9 to 12 volts there. Gamechanger has recommended you don't go with 18 volts as you might damage the pedal. I would also like to stress that you hit that 500 mAh because you can also damage your pedal that way. You know, don't try and cheat it with 450 or you get 400 and see if the power will work. That is a bit of a power need these days, but it is more and more common, especially with the Strymon pedals and some of the other more obviously power hungry pedals. I did a review about a week ago on a pedal board that was like 90 bucks that had that power supply built into it, which impressed me with the price and the quality of it. You can check that link out up here. Anyway, moving on to the back of the pedal. Very simple, actually. There's one unique feature that I'll talk about in a second here, but let's talk about these jacks here. So you've got your jack in, where you would put your input. Then you've got a MIDI in, which you could use to control some of the variables on the front here. You've got your regular power input, a USB-C input, which you can use for MIDI over USB or firmware updates or diagnostics. Then you've got your output. It's a mono output, mono input. The last two jacks here are track in and track out. I had to read about these several times before my head could wrap itself around it. Maybe that was the beer, but let me see if I can explain this in a way that makes sense. First off, there's two features of this pedal that you need to understand. The first is that it is not exactly a pedal that is going to modify or manipulate your sound, like a distortion pedal. You plug in, it jacks up your sound and it outputs a dirty signal, which is the distorted signal that you have, made from the clean signal. This thing is actually more of a synthesizer. So what it's going to do is take your audio, use some sophisticated computer stuff on there to track your signal, and then spin up the motor that's in there to match that tone. That output is a digital reading or whatever of that motor spinning, and that's the sound that you're hearing. So it's not actually your guitar or your synthesizer or your saxophone, whatever you're putting into this is only triggering that sensor that then spins the motor, and then the sound is completely made from that motor. Now the Gamechanger recommends that the signal that is being tracked is clean as possible. So like a clean electric guitar, something that's not distorted or diving all over the place or has vibrato, that sort of thing. Now the second thing that you need to realize is that the pedal itself has a few interesting modulation options. Like you can do cross modulation, which would take the motor sound and modulate it with your signal that's coming in. So it's actually interacting with whatever your signal is. Now you might want to get crazy and have like the dirtiest, raunchiest, distorted signal going in there for that modulation. But then you also need that clean signal to track for the motor. So what they recommend is you would plug your clean signal, your electric guitar, into track in. track in would then track that signal for the motor to get the tones lined up, the key, all that stuff. Then you would track back out with your clean signal, run it through your pedal board, and then the pedal board would go into the jack in, and then you would have whatever your distorted guitar sound in the system to interact for the modulation with the motors. So in a weird way, it's like side chaining to itself. Now, you don't need to do that at all. If you don't have anything in the track in, you could go straight into the regular input and it will take the triggering off of the regular input and use it that way. So that whole track in, circle around kind of business is only if you want like the most absolute pristine, accurate sort of thing. But I have a feeling once you hear this pedal and what it sounds like by itself, maybe it's not going to matter so much if you have like the exact to the minute detail pitch matching and all that stuff. So let's dive into all the different sounds of this, and then at the end I'm going to talk about a few questions that I'm sure you no doubt will have. Pretty easy setup here. I've got just a SG standard going right into the motor pedal. The motor pedal is going direct to my DAW right now, so there's no amplifier, so you get a clean sound. The only sound modification that you're going to hear in this demo is going to be just the motor pedal. So let me turn the motor pedal on by kicking the switch. You see the red light glowing, that means the pedal is indeed on, and you'll notice the sound has changed. Very different signal. Now the motor pedal is advertised as a electromechanical synth engine, and as such, when you're playing a guitar through it, you should look at it as if it is turning your guitar into a monosynth. Now real quick, if you're not familiar with that term monosynth, that would be like an old Moog synthesizer. No matter how many keys you press down, it's only going to play one note. Usually it's either the first note or the last note, but you won't get a full chord out of it like you would with, say, like this Prophet 6. If I play a C, it's going to play all three of those notes. Same with your guitar. You can hear here if I play just a, let's say, a D chord, you're really only getting one of those notes. One at a time. Same sort of concept, really. Now, speaking of the different engines, there's 5 different sounds that can be generated with the architecture in this pedal. The first one is motor, which is what you're hearing now. The next one would be MXD. M-Wave, which is my favorite. I think if you've played a guitar synthesizer before, that sound's probably going to be the most familiar, and I gotta say, the tracking on this is better than any guitar synth I've ever played before. Coil. Now it has an interesting description for coil. What it says with this one is, instead of using DC current to create movement, this mode uses AC current to resonate the motor's coils. This is known as the singing coil effect, and it emits a strong electromagnetic signal that's also picked up by the inductor. You saw how it shut off very abruptly there. We'll get into that in just a second here. The last mode I want to show you is the vocoder. Very cool. Now let's talk about some of these other features here. I'm going to change the motor pedal back to my favorite, the M-Wave. You might see up at the top you've got release and clean. Now release is that thing I was talking about earlier where it'll hold a note and then almost like a gate, once it gets to a certain point, it stops. So even though my guitar might still be resonating, once it gets to that, whatever that level is where it decides, okay, I'm not receiving enough signal, I'm just gonna shut off. And alternatively, I could actually turn the release so it's very quick, so you would have to have almost maximum signal, and anything that drops below that, it's gonna shut off. Alternatively, you could turn the release all the way up so it just plays the note indefinitely like a drone. Now the next knob over from that says clean. Very simply, that is just the amount of clean signal going through the pedal that mixes alongside the motor sound. So let me turn the motor output off, and you'll hear just what the regular clean is. If I turn it clockwise all the way, that should double the amount of output. And turning it counterclockwise will kill the clean signal. There you go. Now the motor sound is independent of that. So let's move into a couple other features here that are on this pedal. So there is also a vibrato or a glide. The vibrato is very easy to understand, right? That adds just a little bit of a waviness. Slow, all the way up to very fast. But the glide is very cool. That is kind of like that zipper effect that you hear, that you'll see on synthesizers a lot. Kind of weird. Now below that you'll see the shift knob. Now what that does very simply is it takes the motor output and it will shift it whatever you have it set to. So in one case you can have it going down a full octave, which if I turn up my clean here, and vice versa, you could go up an entire octave as well. And then there's other intervals as well, like you can do fifth down, a fourth down, fourth up. Now the next section is the mod section. Now this is a two-part control in the sense that if you go counterclockwise, it has one function and clockwise would be another function. So counterclockwise is the normal mod function, which they say here is a engine-specific modulator, for example, wave folding, timbral shifts, waveform morphing, and the intensity increases as you go more and more counterclockwise. Now if you go clockwise with the mod, it becomes the XMod, and that routes the motor signal through an analog multiplier integrated circuit where it is modulated by the main input signal, producing a wide range of complex gritty textures and essentially fusing the two signals together. I'm going to turn off the clean signal and make it just the motor sound, and then we'll mess with those mods, first starting with the regular mod counterclockwise and then moving to the clockwise XMod function. Let's try the XMod factor. Let's move on to the last couple features of this pedal. So there's the tone knob, which is pretty self-explanatory. It is a tone knob that changes your tone. So right now I'm going to center everything up here. We'll go back to the M wave, and this is the centered up tone. Lower the treble of it. And boost the treble. Now the next function is drive, and that's pretty simply just a analog distortion circuit that they have added to the pedal. Normal. And turn the drive up. Is that Eric Clapton? Let's move on to this next section here. So the pedal is the last section on the surface level of this pedal here. And honestly, they could have released this pedal without this and it would have been pretty cool, but I think this is just a cherry on top. So what this basically does is the pedal will then modulate the actual motor that's spinning. So right now it's set to one of 5 different functions that are available to the actual pedal. You've got accelerate, brake, clutch, drift, and volume. Now accelerate very simply takes that signal and will bump it up an octave. So if I slam it to the floor, and brake will do the opposite, it will drop it down an octave. So if I show you that here. Now what's cool about this is even though that seems like a very on-off function, it actually is censored all the way down. So you could ride it very slowly. It also functions as a, what do they call it here? It's the floor it range, which means after you've hit the bottom floor, there's an additional sensor that will then detect even more function and drop it all the way up to possibly a 2nd octave. Now I doubt I'll be able to get that much pressure from sitting here, but I will give you the best example I can here. And you actually get that same functionality in the accelerate as well. You can pretty cool. All right, moving on, we get to clutch. Clutch is like a freeze, so it will just freeze your note that you're on. The secondary function of flooring it actually locks it in, so you don't have to sit there holding the pedal down. Now the next function of the pedal is the drift. Now that is basically like a self-controlled vibrato if you don't want to use the vibrato knob up top there. And lastly, you can control the volume of the motor. So when it's not pressed, clean signal. Now what I like about this is, again, going back to what I was saying earlier, the motor's only going to pick one note and play that. So I don't know what note it's going to select, and you can kind of get these really cool modulations behind your clean signal that's coming through. So I will show you that. And that's kind of what I like about this pedal, is it's easy enough to use to get full functionality out of it, but create some very unique sounds that you don't necessarily come up with on the spot generally, but you can do that here. You just plug it in, turn it on, turn a few knobs, and all of a sudden you're getting some weird noises, you know, that you don't really know what it is. So anyway, that is the motor pedal. I hope that you got a decent idea of what the pedal sounds like and just what you can do with it. I'm a big fan of it. I like that controlled chaos aspect of it where it just sounds totally wild, but then it's also hitting all of its marks when it comes to pitch. And you can certainly throw some crazy stuff at it with the pedal there to kind of add these variances to it. Now let's talk about a question that you're going to no doubt have, which is a question I had about the Gamechanger motors, but interestingly enough, not for this product. So my question is, the motor, how long is that going to last in there? Because I don't want to buy this pedal and then it craps out on me and I have to send it back to Latvia. Well, they have actually thoroughly answered that. So first off, they say conservatively you should expect to get at least 1,500 hours out of this pedal, maybe as much as 3,000 or 5,000 hours. Second of all, they say changing the motor is actually pretty simple. They've put a little panel on the back there, and they say you can order replacement motors and replace them yourself. So you don't have to ship this off anywhere. You don't have to send it to a service center. You don't have to have a master's degree in electronics. They say it's actually very simple, and that is a good thing. Now, going even further beyond that, this is the Mark 1 of the motor synth. Now, this came out in 2020. This has 8 motors in it. This thing, I'd say it gets used maybe once a month, maybe a couple times a month if I'm doing some interesting tracking. And I've never had a problem with any of those motors. They still function perfectly, and they have greatly improved their motor tracking and motor durability and all the products that are involved in that a lot since that came out 5 years ago. They've done a Mark II of the motor synth. Then this builds on that technology using some of that same architecture. So I have no doubt that I'm going to get fantastic life out of this pedal. Now the next question I think I'm going to get is clarification on that whole one note thing. Like, so I can't play chords on this pedal? Well, that's kind of more or less correct. The tracking system needs to grab one note and spin the one motor to match that one note. Now it's going to try and jump all over the place. If you play a couple chords, it might be like, oh, you're playing a, C, no, it's an E, no, it's a G. It's going to grab one of them eventually and spit out that sound. Now, another question along that same line of thinking might be, well, since you got one motor, it at least can do my solos, right? To an extent, yes. Now, if you're Steve Vai and you're playing through this, I don't think the tracking is going to be fast enough to follow along, much less the motor too. The motor has to speed up and slow down to match each of those notes. And yeah, it is super quick. I mean, I think if anybody's got the tracking figured out, it's Gamechanger. But just the idea of doing something like this, to give you an example, high E to low E, pretty instant when you're playing it with your fingers there, because you've got 2 fingers, 2 notes that are already set, and you can play them however you want. But the motor's going to have to go super high and then ramp down super low until it gets to that other E. And it's just going to take time, I don't think you're going to be playing anything much faster than that, but you never know. And Gamechanger is, they might be able to make the tracking even better. Anyway, let me know what you guys think of the Gamechanger motor pedal. I am a big fan of Gamechanger. I think this one is a hit. I hope that they do very well with this pedal. The last set of pedals I got from them were the auto pedals. I got all 3 of them. I wanted to do a video on those like a year ago. They're so complicated that I'll just say this is very refreshing, this pedal. Everything is on the surface. There's very few tweaks that you can do, behind the hood here, as they would say. They can change the sensitivity of this pedal, but that's about it really. And I like that. Complication is good, but kind of is a roadblock also, unless you're like one of those tinkerers, and I'm not a tinkerer. I kind of just leave everything on the surface level. So having all the knobs that you can play with right there on the front is a much needed thing in my life anyway. All right. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I will talk to you next time.